Thank you for joining us today. We are here for a 1-hour session to talk about increasing talent retention. What's the first step we should be taking on this topic? My name is Rachel Behar. I head up digital marketing here at Mahoney Performance Institute. I'll be running the slides in the background and managing our Q&A and chat box as we go through the session. So as you have any questions or thoughts that come up, feel free to put them right there. I'll be moderating all of that and make sure that we get to any of your questions at the end of the session. I'm also joined by my colleague, Bruce Parsons and Sean Mahoney. We'll introduce you to them a little bit later here. But otherwise, like I said, 1 hour talking about talent retention, and any questions, feel free to put it in the chat box. We are recording this full session, so if you want to share it with any colleagues, friends, or just kind of rewatch this session, we will have that over to you tomorrow in an email with a link to the full recording. Otherwise, Bruce, I will hand it over to you to go through our situation analysis, kind of set the scene for where we are.
All right, Rachel, thank you. Welcome, everybody. So we just collected some statistics on this challenge that almost all businesses are facing today. And it's a combination of too few people to work and the rapidly rising salary demands of people because the demand is high and the supply is low. But 77% of companies out there are now focusing on the employee experience to increase retention. Whereas I've never seen companies so interested in the idea of employee experience in my entire 42-year career that I see right now, because many leaders are seeing that if we don't pay attention to this, we can expect to lose good employees. And then managers who consistently acknowledge their teams for good work can reduce turnover by up to 31%. These come from LinkedIn Talent Solutions and Qualtrics. And so as simply as that, just taking the effort to acknowledge your people for what they're doing, the hard work, the effort they're taking in the face of labor shortages and staffing shortages, just acknowledging their good work can go a long way. And then many human resource leaders today are admitting that burnout is sabotaging workforce retention, and it's now accounting for up to 50% of turnover. So there are people choosing to leave just for more money because there's a lot of money being thrown around out there. But many people, about half of the people are leaving because they're just flat out tired. They're overtired, they're fatigued, and they see an offer that they believe will lead to a better conditions for them, less fatigue. So that's a key statistic. And then 70% of employees have said they would leave their current organization to go to work for a company that's known for investing in their employees, investing in their learning, their development, their careers. You know, companies that truly care about their employees are attracting people away from other companies, because 70% of current employees say they would do just that if they were offered something from a company that is known for investing in their employees. So that's kind of the inspiration to do the learning we're going to do together today. And it's just, we like to lead these off with some statistics that kind of describe the challenge that we're all facing. And with that, we'll get started with our conversations about how do you address this.
Awesome. Thanks for setting the scene, Bruce. So in this session today, I have some questions lined up for Bruce and Sean. As you have any of your own questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. We'll have plenty of time at the end of the session to get to those. But my first question today is for you, Sean. So the ABC analysis tool is something that we use a lot here at Mahoney Performance Institute. Can you just share what that tool is, how we should be thinking about it in the context of talent retention?
Sure. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Bruce. Welcome, everyone. So ABC analysis, many of you have heard me talk about this before, but you know, we're truly in this webinar, we're trying to talk about what's the first step. And I think that one of the biggest problems we have as managers is we often don't take the time to really understand who our high potentials are. And then perhaps even who some of our weak players are, because the quality of our team is going to largely be in alignment with our ability to accomplish things. And so I always like, when I think about it, and I think about doing this every 6 months relative to our team, is really looking at ABC analysis for a couple of things. Some organizations, they use something called 9-box. So many of you are using that. When you think of sports teams, why do sports teams, what do? They create a depth chart. So they know who's their starting shortstop, who is number 2 and who's number 3. Really what it's used for is to force rank your talent. And the reason why we want to force rank our talent is we want to be able to invest in those, particularly the highest potential people in the organization. And by definition, they would be an A player. And we're going to walk through some of the specifics in a minute, but it's really about how do we identify those high potential people? How do we make sure that they are the ones that get the unique assignments and promotions? Certainly using this to think through compensation is an important thing. I mean, performance is always going to be linked to compensation. And then lastly, if you're going to have a great organization, if you're going to accomplish great things, if you're going to grow, you've got to have a high quality team. And so ABC analysis is a great tool to be able to top grade your team. Now, this is something that many of you have heard of before. Jack Welch made this famous many years ago. I think that at GE, it's used perhaps differently than what I'm suggesting here. I believe that it should be used because it helps you really figure out who are your high potentials and make sure that you're investing aggressively in them. So those are some reasons why I think ABC analysis is the first step, Rachel. I mean, you mentioned at the top of the webinar that we really want to talk about the first step in retention. And I think it's really by identifying those high potentials.
Awesome. So, it's one thing to identify those players on your team, but it's another to kind of know what each one looks like and then sort of form strategies about how to address each of them. So, Bruce, could you kind of kick us off and let's go through each type, A, B, and C players, just to get a better sense for, what that looks like, just so we can sort of envision our own team members and maybe kind of fit them in those categories, and then some strategies and actions to take with each of them.
Sure. So like Rachel said, the first step, Rachel and Sean said, the first step in addressing this is really knowing and understand who your highest performers are, who are your lowest performers, and then what do you do about it? And then you have a whole group in the middle. So your highest performers are your A's, your lowest performers are your C's, and that 70% of your employees are those come to work every day, do their job well, B players. But the idea behind this is it's not just to identify them, but to decide what do we do about it now, right? So we don't have an infinite amount of time to spend or invest in our employees. So we want to make sure we're using our time and our resources wisely to make sure we're addressing the most impactful areas and most impactful people to work with in the development of our team. So as Sean said, we believe that your highest priority should be developing your A players. They are your highest value employees. They deliver anywhere between 50 to 800% more than your B players, and they're extraordinary. If you could go back to Rachel, I got ahead of myself. So strategies and actions. So the things we can do to develop people are these three major buckets of things we can choose to do. And we point this out in our team leadership program, and we want to highlight this because too often when we talk about developing people, we automatically go to the third bullet there, formal training and development. That's like classroom training or online training that's formalized. That is an element of nurturing and growing talent, but we believe the biggest area of opportunity most businesses have in developing people and growing talent is what we would call experiential learning. And that's giving our talent opportunities to thrive in areas where they wouldn't get to unless we purposely thought about it and assigned it and worked with them to do it. As a project manager, I'm a big believer in giving, A players a project to lead. It's a great way to see how well they can do influencing others to think through a problem, think through a project, plan it out, assign a team, delegate, hold people accountable. It's a great way to grow talent, is to have them lead a project, a business improvement project, or even just put them on a high profile project. Say you've got a team member and give them exposure to higher level people in your organization by putting them on a team with more senior people, a project team that's doing something extraordinary. Get them involved in innovation efforts. Are we thinking about new products or services? Put them with a group that's looking at developing new things for the organization. Get them involved in improving processes and systems. So, just finding experiences for them that they otherwise wouldn't have unless you thought about it and intentionally did something about it. Give them some work to do that you would typically do. Let's say they were a direct report of yours. Is there something you do that they could probably do pretty well? Even better if it's a strength of theirs and it's not a strength of yours. Find ways to delegate work like that to people to increase the challenge of their work experience. So that component of development, we say roughly 70% of development can be in this area of new experiences, new challenges that the employees wouldn't otherwise have if we weren't purposely and intentionally thinking about doing this. Then the next biggest area is coaching and mentoring. So we say this should be about 20% of your development effort. And that's, we kind of delineate here at MPI between coaching and mentoring. So coaching often is done by the supervisor or another, leader in the organization, or a third party potentially coaching others. So we have director and VP level people coached by myself here at MPI. We have a multitude of CEOs coached by Sean. So that's executive or senior leader coaching. And that's really looking at a personalized development plan and doing and working with them and finding opportunities for them to grow and planning it out and executing it. Just like on an athletic team, you have coaches and players. But mentoring is another great way to develop talent. And, we believe that often a mentoring relationship can and should be one in which both the mentor and mentee connect well with each other. So, we believe in finding pairings of people that have a connection. And usually they're not in the same, sometimes it's best if they're not in the same chain of command. And so find mentors who might work best with a mentee, and even ask your person who wants to be developed, is there a senior leader in this organization you really, admire, appreciate, and connect well with, who you'd like to be your mentor, and maybe establish mentor relationships that way. But that's an opportunity for a more senior, experienced leader who's not thinking about the day-to-day of the employee as much as the more strategic development of that employee, and maybe helping them think bigger about the organization and where they could go. And they might feel more comfortable speaking openly maybe with a mentor than their direct supervisor sometimes. But coaching and mentoring is another element. That's about 20%. And then of course, formal training and development. So like MPI, we do a lot of that. We have 3 leadership development programs, personal leadership, team leadership, and organizational leadership. But we also have a multitude of workshops that we do with organizations. We do team coaching, but this is more formal training where they're either attending something live online or in person, or they're doing it in a hybrid approach, or but there's curriculum, there's content, there's stuff they're reading, there's probably tools associated with it. But that's historically, that's what many leaders jump to, thinking of that as where their opportunity for development is, when you see on this page what we're suggesting, that it's a lot more so in experiences and coaching and mentoring, which often don't have any real out-of-pocket costs unless you engage with a third-party coach. Usually the formal training and development involves some sort of cost unless you're yourself performing that at your organization. But we consider these the three biggest buckets of opportunity you have for nurturing and growing talent.
So let's go through, Bruce, and just start maybe identifying, so we can get sort of a image in our mind for what this looks like. So could you just walk us through A players?
Yeah.
What are some of the characteristics there? How should we be thinking about A players? And just for everybody on the call today, in our follow-up along with the recording, you'll get a link to download the tool for yourself. So you'll actually be able to go through and do this exercise with your team.
Sure. So we like this tool because it's a very simple, straightforward tool and approach to identifying your players, right? And like Sean said, there's the 9-box tool, which many organizations use, which is more detailed, a little bit more complex. It still gives you good information and informs you well, but we like simple, straightforward structures at MPI, and we're a big believer in this approach called the ABC analysis. And simply stated, your A players are your people who you see to be like roughly in the top 25% of performers in your organization, and they exhibit the potential to play larger roles in your organization. So this is an and, not an or. Your A players must be top performers and have potential to serve in higher roles and have a great attitude towards the organization, their work, and their team. So an A player must satisfy all three of those. They're not just a top performer. Don't just have a great attitude, and they don't just have potential. We suggest they have all three of those. And that's why, we see only about 20% of your organization are probably going to meet all three of those criteria. So those are your A players that, as we noted earlier, they deliver a lot. They are very expensive to replace. They grow and develop others. They lead by example. They have great attitudes, and they're your most valuable players. And so if you're going to invest anywhere, your top priority should be investing in your A players to nurture them and make sure they absolutely want to stay with you. So this group of people should be your highest priority for your development efforts, for your funding, for your time and other efforts spent. So as we stated earlier, think of those three areas of opportunity for developing them, but that your A players are your highest, most important category of employee to nurture and develop.
Let's go to the next tier. Can you talk about B players? What do they look like?
So B players are like the core of your organization. They're 70% of your team. They're solid team players. We don't want to lose them either. These are the people that show up every day. They do their job really well. And many of them don't have aspirations to be more than they already are. They love what they do. They love the role that they play. They're really good at it. They feel confident in it. And many times B players don't aspire to lead others, and that's fine. We should not penalize people for not wanting to lead or not, having the desire to lead others. Every organization needs a lot of solid B players. So they are in the top 70% of performance in your company. They may or may not have the potential to lead at a higher level, and may or may not want to, but they must also have a good attitude. We don't state that on here, but We see attitude as very, very important in employees today. And they must have a good attitude about their work, their team, the organization. So this is the core of your organization. We should honor and respect them. We shouldn't penalize them if they don't want to move higher in the organization. These can be many of your solid individual contributors in your organization, but they are very important. But what we would suggest is, as leaders, you might want to be looking for your B players who have potential to move into the A category, and that may be discovered better if sometimes they're not exactly in the right role and put in a little different role. They could have more potential and to serve at a higher level, or it could inspire them to lead. But clearly you want to find the B players who could be A's, but you also want to give them, good, solid development opportunity. You just won't be potentially giving them as much attention as your A players. So those are your B players.
And the last tier is C. Sean, could you walk us through what they look like?
Yeah, sure. Rachel. So the tricky part about C's, I get a lot of questions on C's, particularly when I'm working with CEOs and we're going through and we're doing this with their executive team. Because, everyone has in most instances feels like they have a really, really strong team, and everyone is either an A or everyone, they don't have any C's. Here's the bottom line with C's, and this is what makes it tricky. I could have someone who performs really well, who has the capability of playing a much larger role. So, at least meeting two of the criteria for being an A player, but they have a terrible attitude toward the company, maybe a terrible attitude toward their team. They're very difficult to work with. They're the cancer of the organization. And by definition, you're a C player if you have a bad attitude. Automatically, no matter how good your performance is, et cetera. And the reason is that these are the types of people that can bring the rest of the organization down. They can undermine your ability to lead an organization because they're looking at it and they're saying, hey, why isn't Sean doing something about this? Why is he allowing this to go on? So it really undermines our ability to be able to drive an organization. So generally speaking, a C player, maybe they're not aligned with the company's vision. Maybe they have a poor attitude. Maybe they just are not one of the top performers. And in many instances, when people have been a good performer before and they're not a good performer now, it could be that they're miscast. It could be that they're going through personal difficulties. And those are the things that our job, before we automatically classify someone as a C, we need to dig a little bit deeper. We need to make sure that, hey, maybe it's something I've been doing as their supervisor. Maybe I committed that I was going to do something and then I'm not following through. And as a result, they've developed a poor attitude. So you've got to go a little bit deeper. And what I always do is I always view it as, if I've got a C player, my first question is, what have I done wrong? Is there something that I'm not delivering on? Is there something I committed to that I'm not delivering upon? Am I not giving them the support that they need? Those are important questions from a self-awareness standpoint. You got to be able to take a step back. But then the second thing is, our job as leaders is to make sure that we put people in the right roles. So the second thing is, have I miscast them? Have I put them in a position where they can't be as successful? And maybe if I took them out and I moved them to another position, they could be very successful in a different position. So this happens in sales a lot. You meet someone in the organization, I think they'd be great in sales because they get along really well with people. They start working in sales, they're not closing and they're not making any progress. Honestly, they're miscast. Because they really didn't have the follow through. They didn't have the ability to be able to bring something to closure. So our job is not only to, develop a team and build a team, but make sure that people are in the right roles where they can make the greatest impact on the organization each and every day. And so it's really important when you start to look at C players that you just don't automatically cast someone as a C, that you got to dig a little bit deeper. I think that's a really important thing.
Awesome. So just to kind of recap so far, we're about halfway through. So we talked about, some strategies and different ways that at MPI we think about employee nurturing and retention. We've also walked through A, B, and C players. But let's zoom out a little bit. Let's talk about actually putting this into action. So Sean, let's imagine, someone on this call has downloaded the worksheet, they've gone through, they have it in hand and they're ready to start, assessing their team and evaluating who are their A, their B, and their C players. Can you just walk us through that? So how do we sort of think about and create that organizational development plan from all of this information that we've talked about so far?
Yeah, I think our goal, Rachel, ultimately is we want to institutionalize this. But, what we find is that if organizations try to go really fast with this, it's something that can go awry very quickly. For example, around the organization, people start getting they start hearing this ABC analysis thing is going on, and they wonder, what does that mean? What am I, an A, B, or C? And and it really can become a big distraction to the organization. So, we feel like the most important thing is to start with the CEO and the executive team. And what we want to do is we want to take the CEO through an ABC analysis of their team. So by definition, ABC is really a force ranking. Bruce mentioned before the criteria, but the criteria is used as a goal that let's say you have 10 members on your executive team. By definition, you can only name 2 of them as being A players, assuming they meet the definition. 7 of them in general would be B players, and then 1 would be categorized as your C, even if you think they're a decent performer. And the reason why you do this, it's no different than creating a depth chart for an athletic team, is you want to know really who are your highest potential people in your organization, who could play that bigger role or play a larger role in the organization. And so you start with the executive team. Once they get comfortable with the process, we then take it to the next level down. So the next level down would be the executive team and their direct reports. And you would take them through the exact same exercise. We think it's really important to do it in those first 2 levels of the organization. Make sure everyone's comfortable with it before they start trying to use it as a broader tool in the organization. But once they've gotten comfortable and they've gone through generally 2 cycles of it, so let's assume we do it, in June, we also do it in January. Now let's look for taking out to the broader team. And again, I'd probably do it 2 levels at a time. Make sure that everyone's in a good rhythm, and then go from there. So we like doing it 2 times a year. I think that one of the critical things that you can start to do, and the reason why ABC analysis is critical, is let's say that Rachel, who's on the call with us here today, is my A player. There's ways to start making sure that Rachel knows that she's one of your high potentials. And you don't have to say, hey, Rachel, you're my A player. And then everyone else overhears it and they say, well, then what am I, chopped meat or chopped liver? I'm the B player. We don't want that to start happening. But what I want to make sure is that when I do have my review with Rachel, whether it's informally on a quarterly basis or during my annual review, I want her to know that she's one of my key players. I want her to know that she's really, really important to us. And I might even whisper something to her, hey, Rachel, I really think you can play a bigger role in this organization. I'm not calling her an A player, but I'm signaling to her. Here's the reason. I don't want to find out that I'm going to lose Rachel, 3 months from when I sit down and I have my review with her. It's because she really didn't know if she had an opportunity to play a bigger role in the organization. So I think it's really important that as you start to think through this, you make sure that your team really understands how to use the tool and how to communicate it. If I ended up having a B player on my team, for example, I'd say, hey, listen, I got to tell you, you're one of the core players on my team. I'm not sure whether you want to play a bigger role, and I'm not even sure that you can play a bigger role, but I'm committed to continually developing you because you do great stuff for us. That's an example of a discussion you'd have with a B player. Now, a C player if I were having a discussion with them at their performance review, I'd say, and let's say it's Bruce. Bruce, you're not a C player, but I'm going to use you as an example. Is that I'd say something like, "Hey, Bruce, listen, we've been through a lot together. You've had some really good days and you've had not so good days. I'm not sure you're in the right role right now. What do you think?" And I would try to engage in a discussion with them about it. Or, "Bruce, I've seen you do great work before, but over the last 6 months, you've really been struggling." Okay. I'm signaling to Bruce that something's got to change. I'm talking to him about specifically something has to change. I'm having a C discussion with him. Okay. And so why we say it's important to start with the executive level and then go one down is the executives and I'll call it the senior level folks are probably much more comfortable having that discussion, without having to go to the ABC acronym. But the ABC analysis is something that really helps you think about who are your ABC and players so that you can have these kinds of discussions. I want to make sure that I don't lose Rachel Behar because she's wondering what her opportunity is at the company. And that's why you would start at the executive level and then you'd work your way down.
Bruce, do you have anything else to share in terms of ways that you've used this tool to help, clients that we work with kind of put all of this into action?
Yeah, I mean, we've discussed, especially in the last couple of years with clients, the importance of frequent interactions with your employees, and even having monthly one-on-ones with all of your employees, with your direct reports. There's more and more data out there that says more frequent, less formal interactions are what is most appreciated, especially amongst the younger generation coming in the workforce today. Not that others don't appreciate it as well, but it's much more appreciated by our younger workers. But use those opportunities we use the analysis to understand where our people largely stand. And that's just one way to inform us as leaders on how do we use that information to now work well with each one of our team members. But in the end, what we want to do is we want to have a way in which we're helping each one of our team members be the best version of themselves that they can be. But it doesn't all rest with us as leaders. We need to be sharing with our team members, but that they need to own their development. They need to own their career. And we shouldn't be spoon feeding people and here's what's next for you. The healthiest thing to do is ask our people, where do you want to go and why? And then we coach and mentor them on how to get there. It's just a healthier, more responsible way to get our team members involved in their own growth and development, because then they have a bigger stake in it. So really, what we want to do is ideally create a plan with each one of our team members. Where do they want to go? And then some ideas on how they're going to get there. And we're big believers in 3s to 5s, no more than 3 to 5 things they're working on at any given time to achieve some goal, some development goal that they might have. It's just identifying what is it we want to do, what's the plan to do it, and let's hold each other accountable that we actually get it done. It's pretty simple and straightforward, but not enough companies are doing this because they're so busy. But we highly recommend that give yourself permission to meet monthly with each of your team members. Have a 30-minute conversation with them. Understand where it is they want to go and why, and what are some simple steps they can start taking to get there. Just that simple act of caring can go a long way in keeping employees. That doesn't cost a lot of money or time. It just takes a little bit of showing that you care and a little bit of time and effort. It can go a long way. It doesn't need to cost a lot of money, but it can make a big difference for your employees. So find ways to liberate your employees to be the best they can be and get them enrolled in being a big part of it instead of them just following what you're asking them to do. They have a stake in it. They've decided where it is they want to go and why, and we are helping them get there.
Rachel, can I make one comment on that just as a follow-on to the individual plans? So I do think that it's really important. Bruce brings up a great point. We try to push people to go through our training programs to take an active role, meaning bring it to your supervisors, in terms of where you want to go and what your aspirations are. But, one of the hard parts of being a manager is that, what happens if you have someone who says, this is where I want to go, but honestly, they're not well suited, and maybe they're setting themselves up for failure. Maybe it's not an area where they really have sort of the core strengths and abilities to be successful there. Our job, that same coaching and mentoring that Bruce is talking about, is, it's okay to say, hey, Rachel, I get it. I know that you're thinking sales. I think you're awesome in marketing. But when you talk about sales, there's some other skills that I don't think may necessarily come as easy to you. Are you sure you're up for that? I mean, I think having those discussions, it's really healthy, because you part of your job and part of your experience is that you can look at them and say, you know what, I think you're heading in the wrong direction too. So that's a little bit tougher discussion, because you don't want to take people's dreams and aspirations away. But if they really are setting themselves up to be miscast, perhaps, I think it's our responsibility as leaders to be able to let them know that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So as a follow-up to all of this, we'll share the ABC analysis tool that's pictured now on the screen with everyone in the follow-up. But are there any other tools or resources that either of you would recommend to just help us continue this learning?
Well, those of you who know us well, we really love Patrick Lencioni as an author and business speaker and so on. And he's got two great books on people, the 5 dysfunctions of a team, and what are the attributes any high performing team needs to have. The Ideal Team Player is another great book that talks about the 3 attributes of hungry, humble, and smart. And you could use that in the development of your people as well. Are your people, do they meet all 3 of those? Are they hungry? Are they humble? Are they smart? And smart being not IQ, but EQ. Do they work well with others? I've recently come across a book called Talent Wins, which is really geared towards for HR leaders, but it talks an awful lot about what we talked about today, identifying your high potentials and finding the best way you can to nurture them along, because they're going to help your company go a long way. And top grading is another idea. Sean mentioned that earlier. We were living in that when I was working with GE, and that top grading is basically you're consistently finding, identifying your top performers and your middle performers. And when you take it to the nth degree, like GE used to do, is if you were in the bottom 10%, each year the bottom 10% rolled out and a new 10% came in. So they're consistently improving the quality of their workforce. Jack Welch wrote a book called Straight from the Gut and Winning. Those are another two good resources. But there's an awful lot out there now on blogs, on LinkedIn, out there in the social media and so on, that much of it doesn't have a lot of great context, but I think you can find good nuggets out there on developing and retaining employees. It's a very hot topic today. And, join LinkedIn groups that talk about, that are focused on talent development. It can that way it feeds you current information that might be very helpful for you. Little nuggets here or there that you don't have to actually go look for. It's directed at you by a tool like LinkedIn, because you've asked to be a part of a talent development group.
Rachel, can I just make a comment on this too? So when you think about what we're talking about here, we're not talking about can you put that tool back up, Rach, just for a second? We're not talking about the way that Jack Welch used this. And we're not even really talking about top grading per se. We're thinking in terms of retention. And if we're going to retain really great people, we've got to identify who our really great people are and have some mechanism or some tool that we use to think through it. So we're not suggesting that in the old GE deal days, where they used to, as Bruce said before, the bottom 10% automatically leave, and then you bring more in. We can't. Most organizations, unless you're the size of GE or larger, can afford to do that, because you'll create a fear culture. And we're always apprehensive of even bringing up the term ABC analysis, from the standpoint of people are going to think, oh, that's just going to create fear in our organization. It will if it was used along the lines of how it was used at GE or in classic top grading. It will, but other than that, we like to use this just as an objective tool to think through your team. And when you think through your team and you identify who your high potentials are, these are the people that can probably bring the most leverage to your organization, can probably, are the most leverageable people you have in your organization in terms of their impact across the organization. Is that we want to make sure we identify them. We don't want to lose them because they're wondering where they stand in the organization. We want to make sure they're very clear. And those that are really struggling, we want to make sure that we can get them into better roles and or onto better places to work. But it's not just a hardcore approach. Now, there are times when you use this as a hardcore approach. So my background, many of you know, is in turnarounds. And generally, the reason why companies get in trouble is they have a weaker team than they need. And generally, with the improvement of the team and the quality of the team over a period of time, the performance will improve. And because the stakes are so high and the time is so little that you have to top grade. And using a process like this can be very, very effective. But that's not what we're suggesting here. This is really about the first step in retention, is really using a tool like this to better understand who your high potentials are, so that you can start working through the process of making sure that you develop and mentor them.
Awesome. Thanks for adding that, Sean. So we have a little bit of time left, and we've gotten some good questions throughout the presentation here. So if we're good, we're going to go to answer some of these audience questions that we have. So the first one we have here is, do you have any experience with or advice for companies struggling with low or non-performers? So what sounds like maybe those C players, especially in this sort of talent shortage that we're experiencing right now. It's kind of better to have a body here than nobody, but it's sort of sending a message to the team. So any thoughts or experience with that?
Bruce, you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one because your loyal employees today, and if they're working in a staffing shortage situation, when the staff is short, your dedicated loyal employees have to work more and harder. But most of the data out there shows that keeping a non or low performer, especially those with bad attitudes, actually is harming you more than you ever realize. And we almost always recommend that you find ways to inspire bad attitude employees that can't be recoverable. Like Sean said, sometimes bad attitudes can be recovered, meaning that there's a reason behind it that can be addressed, and that bad attitude can be shifted. Like they're in the wrong role and they can be put in the right role, or they just have a huge personality conflict with their leader, and if they were working with another person, their attitude would shift dramatically. But in general, we would suggest to you that keeping people who are non or low performers are harming you more than you think. The impact on morale, the distrust people have because the leaders aren't doing something about it, is causing you harm, intangible harm that it's hard to see, but it's really there. And even though it's going to make you even shorter on bodies, the impact on your organization is better than if you hold on to it. Now, I'm not saying that's always the case, but that's largely, it's usually a better decision than not, is to take action to inspire those people to choose to leave, to self-select out. It is painful because you think, gosh, it means I'm going to have one less person to do this work. It's probably, you're probably facing a situation where that person might be inspiring other better performers to choose to look to work elsewhere because you're tolerating this non-performer. It's tough, it's difficult, but more often than not, you're going to be much better off if you once you've realized that they're not salvageable, recoverable, is to inspire them to self-select out.
Rachel, let me just add to that. Bad attitudes need to go, period, end of story, right away, because they can have a huge impact. So if you think it's a struggle now finding talent, but at the same time, you're losing good people out the back end because you're retaining someone in the spirit of, you know what, it's hard to find good people. You know, a lot of organizations I work with have made decisions, conscious decisions to ban their growth because if they can't have great talent that can make things happen, they'd rather grow at a slower pace. That's one thing. What I'll tell you from my background in turnarounds, it's not unlike the environment we have here. When you go into a turnaround, it's not like you have lots of attractive things to offer people. You've got a struggling company, you're losing money, and you've got to try to figure out things fast. And so it's not like you're going to attract the very best talent in the world to come work with you on this great adventure, at least initially. And so I view it as it's almost like if you think about a sports season. If we were the New York Yankees and we weren't really happy with the play of our third baseman, well, we probably can't make any significant moves till the end of the season, right? So we're sort of stuck with that third baseman. We do the best we can possibly do it, but we have a game plan for as we come into a little bit better times that we're going to make an aggressive change. Now, if you have someone on your bench who has an attitude problem and they're not showing up for batting practice, okay, then you just get rid of them right away. That's the attitude problem. And so I almost look at it, it's on some level, it's like leading a sports team. You may go through a season or a period of time, maybe it's this year, where you're going to be stuck dealing with people who aren't your top performers for a period of time, but you have a game plan for how you're going to upgrade that team as you get to a little bit better times. I think that's a critical mindset that you need to wrap your head around. Attitude problems need to go because that undermines your ability to lead. People are going to look at you and they're saying, why do they tolerate this? I'm leaving. I'm going to go someplace else. And people can.
So we got another good question about who this tool is meant for. So, we had mentioned earlier in the presentation that it's good to start at kind of that executive level and get in a good rhythm before moving, to the rest of the organization. But someone wrote, I am a team leader. I'm not a CEO or on our executive team. Is this tool still relevant for me? And if so, how should I be thinking about it, at the level that I am?
Well, Bruce, you want me to start with this one and then you can comment? So here's what I would say is this is absolutely applicable. And it's maybe even more important at your level. Don't wait for your organization to cascade this down to in my mind, this is just a good tool for assessing your team. And it probably would be helpful for you to think through, hey, who are the people that maybe I want to put on a certain project? Or maybe this is how I want to make recommendations for compensation. I'm going to use this tool to try to help me organize my thoughts. When I think about, someone asks, hey, is there anyone in your organization that could play this other role? Well, I've actually used this tool to think through that. Yeah, I'd recommend that Sue, has this opportunity that's out there on the horizon. And then all of a sudden you become a team leader who's known for developing really good people and actually moving them around the organization for greater benefit. So I think it's very applicable. My only reason for saying starting at the top is that if the question is about how do you institutionalize it, I think it's very important that your senior leaders really understand how to use it effectively before it's largely used across the board in your organization. But I would start using this tool tomorrow if I'm a team leader. And if I felt like, hey, I could sort of use this to bucket my employees, I think it would be very helpful. Bruce?
Yeah, I fully agree with Sean. This is just taking ownership of your team and owning that, you're responsible for everything your team does and doesn't do. And this tool gives you a more objective way to assess and understand where they might be and where you should spend your precious time and effort. It's not completely objective, but it's much more objective than other, less tangible ways of saying who are my better players and who are my stronger players and weaker players. But absolutely, if you're leading a team, you want to own where they are, where they stand, who should get the most attention and why, because otherwise you're just trying to distribute your time, in an undefined and unclear way, and you're going to struggle and you're going to just kind of spin your wheels. So use tools like this to make good decisions. They're not always the perfect decision, but it's an informed decision that you can act with confidence on. And that's why we're big advocates of using tools like this, just to find a structured way of dealing with a challenge. And this is a good structured way of dealing with, identifying who I'm going to develop, how and when, with my precious time and resources.
Awesome. So one thing at Mahoney Performance Institute that we like to do is just make sure that, everything that we're talking about here, whether they're, webinars or any of our programs, like Bruce had mentioned earlier, are, tangible things that you can go and actually apply in your day-to-day work. So Sean, I'm going to kick it off with you, and then I'm going to go to Bruce and just ask for you to share, one key action or key takeaway that folks can take leaving this session today.
Yeah, I think a key takeaway that I would walk away with is it's not a big company thing. There's a myth out there that when you think about 9-box or you think about doing ABC analysis, that's what big companies do. It is more important for smaller companies. And I'll tell you why, is that if I have a 5-person team and I lose one key person who was one of my high potentials, I've lost not just 20% of the team, I've lost something much greater than that. And so the importance of you really starting to identify and have those discussions with people that are really critical to you, that are the real difference makers in your organization, needs to start immediately. It's a very, very tough market out there to find really good people. So the ones that you have, you better keep. And so to me, that's probably the most important thing. If you haven't really assessed your team and you haven't really thought through who are the difference makers on your team, the time to do it is now. And I think that tool is a very simple way of doing it. Can I add one more? I think that one of the biggest challenges that managers have is that they just assume that everyone on their team knows that what the opportunities are, et cetera. And if I could tell you one thing that I think managers get wrong, is that they assume that people know things. And our most important thing that we can do for our people, if we want them to be effective, if we want them to have an enjoyable workplace, et cetera, is we don't want them to wonder where they stand. We don't want them to wonder what the opportunity is. We don't want them to wonder, period. Because when they're wondering, they're not focused on what we really want them to do, which is make a difference for our customers and for our organization. So I would say those are the two things.
Bruce, what about you? One key action or just takeaway that people can leave with?
Yeah, I would say, because I'm seeing this more and more, is as we've become an increasingly busy world, and leaders all the way up to CEOs are getting caught up in busyness, and we're dealing with fires and day-to-day tasks, and not enough effort is spent on strategic stuff like this. And just to encourage all of you to give yourself permission to spend some time, purposeful and intentional time on this, because the return on the investment of that time is very high. If you can keep one good employee that you might not have otherwise kept because you chose to take time out of your day to do this kind of analysis, thinking, planning, growing, developing, it will happen well. If you try to dabble in this and just try to find the time to do this, I can assure you, you won't. So find a way to plan this kind of activity as a leader into your day, to be effective at it.
Awesome. Well, I hope all of you got as much out of this conversation as I did. Like I said at the start, we will be sending both a link to download your own ABC analysis practice tool along with the full recording to this session. So you are more than welcome to rewatch this or share it with anyone that you think could benefit from this information. Our information, our own contact information will also be in that follow-up email. So if you have any questions as you go through the tool, please don't hesitate to reach out to either myself, Sean, or Bruce. We are all here to answer, any of your questions and kind of help you think through this with your own team and in your own organization. Otherwise, we thank you for your time and we hope you enjoyed and have a great night. Thank you.